Hey everyone, welcome to the Parts Girl podcast. I have Mark Payne with me. He's with CDK, and I wanted to interview him on the show because of all the craziness going on with CDK. And he's well known for physical inventories across the country, and they have a great PartsRec solution to help reconciliation in the parts department. So, Mark, my first question to you is, what are you guys hearing from your clients? What are you guys recommending? What are the big concerns?
So obviously we started getting a lot of calls about, from the very beginning when they went down and saying, hey, we can't, like especially our PartsRec customers, they were like, hey, we're dead in the water here. What's going on? Well, their biggest problem was we can't find our parts. They're all there, but you don't know what bin location they're in, all those things. So that was something that was the very first phone calls that we got. How can you help us? So, the biggest thing for us was, and now we're getting the calls of, well, how do we deal with this? How do we clean up this mess afterwards? So there's really no magic to it. It's just, in a nutshell, everything that you've done from the time the system went down to when it comes back up you have to do business. Obviously you're doing business, but everything that you do with the parts has to be recreated in the system afterwards. So
Yeah,
it's just
just the fact of the crazy.
that's the fact. So you can sit there and think about all these different neat ways of how to fix it, but at the end of the day, that's just it. That's all you're going to have to do is just recreate everything. And some people are saying, oh well, we'll just do, like on ROs, we'll open up a new RO and we'll do a sublet item and put it in sublet for all the stuff that they've done up to that, so they don't have to go in and put the part numbers in and all that. And the problem with that is your pad is not going to be relieved of parts based on that. So you're just better off just basically keeping track of it. Obviously, there's a number of things that you have to do during the downtime.
And there's no shortcut to when it comes back on. You have to just do the normal process of how you would
Yep.
enter it all in so that everything can match up. And what would you say like the concerns are, or anything that you're getting on like physical inventories? Were there any clients in the middle of a physical, or are there clients still going through a physical while this is down? Like, what is that like?
So we do annual physicals, and then we do physical inventories for buy sells. So nobody was in the middle, but none of our inventories were going on. And then we do them all over the country, so several hundred a year. So we didn't have any effect from that because it didn't go down during an inventory. We
Okay.
have had an effect since then because obviously for our CDK dealers, we can't perform an inventory unless the system is out. It's just not possible. So those have been, rescheduled. But the question is, we do have ones that are, fortunately, one of the things we did do, our CDK dealers that are not on PartsRec that we had recently done their inventory for, we were able to send them an Excel file that we had from the inventory, which had all the data fields they need. So the part number, the location, all that. So they were able to kind of continue doing business. And
Yeah, that's a big
so,
deal to
yeah,
have that
definitely.
information, because that's what we were getting too. Like, how do we find these parts? What do we have in inventory?
Right.
And having that data backup, so that at least they can see, in a spreadsheet what they
Yeah,
have.
it gives them your on-hand quantities are going to be off just because of the movement from between the last, when we did the inventory to then. But so yeah, it's just it's a very difficult situation. My recommendation, if dealers are still struggling with that as they're waiting to be brought back on, think about who might have that information. You may have, like for us, PartsRec, we have all of that data. Our clients were able to go in and look it up. Is there another program that you might interface with that has that data, whether it be an ordering system or something like that, and they're able to provide that data to you? Just even if it's in an Excel spreadsheet, you can use that to search for part number, and boom, you know where the part's at. You go find it. You're back in business. You can, you can go from there. And that's kind of the first issue is, how do you find your parts? Well, there you go. That's one way. If you don't have anything like that, you're really, it's really in a tough spot. And some manufacturers actually have that information. So
Mm-hmm.
because they're
Yes.
pulling it, because on their parts labels that they're sending them, when they order the parts, the bin location's on there. So that's another way of another place you might be able to find that information. But really, that's the main thing is finding them. Once you get that, then the next question, the next second obvious question is, okay, how do we keep track of all these sales? And
A spreadsheet.
yeah, spreadsheets, or go back to old school. Get pre-numbered parts tickets and pre-numbered ROs, and go back to the old manual way. I mean, it's I know a lot of people maybe forgot how to write with all the over the years with
Yeah.
with all of the technology. Nobody really writes anymore.
No.
But
Man, it's a
but
learning
it's
experience, that's for sure, from all this.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it just you go back to those, and if you're not if you're not able to get pre-numbered forms, at least have a numbering sequence, for each like writer or counter person. They would have their own sequence, and that way you can keep track of all those, and then you go back to it makes it easier to recreate it afterwards, and
Mhm.
you put your created part ticket number or RO number in the system when you come back on and recreate.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and that way there's always kind of a cross reference. You have it, you've got it. Another thing that one of our clients actually was doing is they were just using the hat number as their ticket. So every time they write up a vehicle, they've got the hat number. So all their advisors have the hat numbers, and they're using that as their RO number. So that
That's a
and
good.
that's how they're tracking everything.
Yeah.
Uh,
I love the way that, talking to dealers and all across, like all the things that they're coming up with to have a process. And then the biggest thing out of it is just like working together, figuring it out, and creating some sort of process. So it's not just chaos of like, what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. And it's scary. I mean, there's no question about it. But when you really just sit back and take a deep breath, it's really not that major of a deal. I mean, lots of parts and lots of cars were sold way before computers came along.
Hmm.
And so it's really just a matter of how do we just keep track of it so that it minimizes the amount of work we have to do once it comes back up. And so keeping track of those sales we talked about, but the other side of it is what about our receipts? The parts that are coming in, how do
Yeah.
we keep track of those? You want to make sure that you're not just allowing your technicians to come in your parts department. First of all, never want to have that. But second of
Never.
all, even in a crisis like this, you don't want people, okay, just go find the part if you can't. You want to make sure that you're tracking all of that, because
Oh,
if you
and like
don't,
dedicating people to certain things. Yeah. Because if
exactly,
you don't
yep,
track it, you're going to
absolutely,
say,
yeah. And
yeah.
at the end of the day, a lot of dealerships already. I mean, if the parts manager goes on vacation for a week, a lot of the stuff sometimes isn't even getting put into the system because you've got a person that's receiving, and there's different types of dealers. I mean, obviously there's some that their systems are kind of old school, and then there's ones that are, they receive the parts in, the quantity's updated, they do it through the program. Then there's others that are just checking packing slips, and they're circling the quantity on hand, and then they give them to the parts manager, and the parts manager goes into the system and receives them in, and then codes that and matches it to an invoice and turns it into accounting. So that's really no different of what you're looking at here. It's just like the parts manager went on vacation for a week, so they have to recreate all those things when they get back. So
Yeah.
so receiving parts and things like that, it's just really important that you just keep everything organized so that when it's back up, you can go in and do all of those things. Because like for our PartsRec customers, we'll get all of that data as long as they put it in. And a lot of dealers are saying, "Oh gosh, our reconciliation is going to be a mess." Well, no, it's not. It's going to be fine, because you're just going to have some long days of doing data entry, and 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 I think, obviously in dealerships, probably people are going to band together and help out where needed. And so, getting some people maybe from accounting, the people that are fast on the keyboards to help get caught up with these things. Those are the ways to do it.
Just gonna take some time. But so
Yeah.
in regards to PartsRec and just making sure everything is, it's not going to be perfect, right? Like this is, the goal is to be perfect, but is there anything that you would recommend for dealers, like when they're putting information in, like anything to look for, to be cautious of, to make sure that, I know tracking and keeping as much as we can, but like when you're doing the work in there, is there anything to look for to make sure it's less of a mess?
Yeah, I mean, you just want to, if it was me, I would get all of my receipts posted in that order and then start, billing out as well, kind of shortly thereafter. But, all of it doesn't matter what way it goes in, because let's say that you go and create a ticket that you had sold some parts on. Your system will just, and again, that depends on how the system is set up. If your system allows to go to negative on hand, it will work itself out, because you may sell that part and you had zero on, you're showing zero on hand, it goes to a negative on hand. When you go receive that part, it'll just bring it back. So it's not a big issue. The systems that don't allow negative on hand, or the dealers that don't allow negative on hand, that's where you may run into a little bit of an issue, and because then you're forced selling, and that causes certain issues with on hands getting messed up. So if your system does not allow negative on hands, or and it may force you to create a special order. Well, if you want to create the special order, fine, and then when you get that part, you're going to have to receive it. But to me, that's a little bit more work. Just get everything received, then go in and start filling out the orders. So that would be my recommendation. And receiving, normally you're receiving off an order that was created. So these are things, if you were doing orders while the system was down, those orders are not in the system. So you can't just hit a button and receive all. You're going to have to go in and do manual plus minus adjustments. So
Yeah.
that can get time consuming.
Very much.
So
I think it's also going to really affect just the history of, I mean, it's going to get put in there, but it's going to affect, what parts should be ordered, like moving forward. All the
Yeah.
history. Yeah. Because if you're,
Well,
not-
you're
if you're,
definitely going to have, they're definitely going to have big orders on the very first, because they're on the first few days of when they're coming back on, because the system is going to be looking at that. And that's actually probably a good point. That's another reason to probably receive everything before you start selling it off, because if you start putting all your orders in, and you haven't received it and you wait a day or so to put those in, all of a sudden the system's going to show, oh, you have zero, you have these on hand, these have all been sold. We need to order those. Well, you already ordered them manually through the system, through the OEM. So you don't want to create that problem either. I just think the best thing, receive everything in first, sell out, and then start recreating all the parts tickets and ROs is going to be your best bet.
Yeah.
And cleanest thing.
cleanest thing, and then you can actually see what you need to stop moving forward.
Yeah, and then the system is going to take a little while to work itself out, but it shouldn't really affect it, because you're recording the sales, and the system is looking at what you had on hand, and eventually once you get all the sales recorded in, the automatic stock replenishment catches up with it. So
Yeah.
you really just don't want to be in a situation where you're now double ordering, because you didn't receive your parts in. So that's just something that you want to look out for. And it's not the end of the world, but
Yeah. But you don't want to double order. You don't want to have too much. Yeah. You have to be careful.
Exactly. Yeah. Obsolescence is a big enough problem.
It's already, yeah.
In itself. So you don't want to just keep adding to it. So I think that's really the biggest takeaways is there's no shortcut to this. It's just, buckle down, get it, get as much help as you can, and just do it, because it's you want to. The other part is, for warranty claims and all that. I mean, everything's to be recreated in the system anyway, unless the
Yeah.
manufacturers come up with some program to accept, handwritten ROs for warranty claims, things like that. Which I doubt.
No,
It's probably not going to
that would
happen.
be
So
very messy. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just, and then you don't have the history and all that. So it's just, it's
It's just one
sometimes
of
we
those
try to
things.
create workarounds that actually cause us more work.
That's what I was gonna
So
say. Yeah, it's just one of those things you just gotta get through it. And man, I feel for those dealers that have do thousands of ROs in one day, and the one. I mean, maybe they did still do 1,000 while it was shut down. I don't know. I haven't heard that it slowed too many down. Like I feel like we're just powering through it.
yeah, well, this is the car business, so we are a very resilient breed, and
Mhm.
they car dealers rise to the occasion
Yeah.
and figure out how to. They are not going to let a dollar squeak by. They want to take every opportunity to get that revenue, and I get it, and it's important.
It's got a business you can run. Yeah.
It, so they get creative and they get it done, but it's making sure that you're not creating a bigger problem is the big thing by trying to outthink the system, and it's really just there's no shortcut around it and get it done. And I know it has slowed some dealers down. Obviously there's, especially the biggest pain point we were told was we can write we can handwrite ROs, we can do all this, we can't find our parts.
Mhm.
That was the biggest complaint. And
Yes, I that was the first thing. We got requests, do you have our inventory? And luckily we
yeah,
do take backups. So we have that. I mean, there's some
yep,
data that now that we're going through this that we're like, oh, we should definitely look at this data set so that we have like more of that. I'm calling it like
yeah,
that fire plan, that backup. So they have everything they need. But even
yeah,
just having an
exactly.
inventory pad and the list price, the location, like
Yep.
that's just huge.
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, I mean they were, that was, they could get all the costs and the list and
Impossible.
everything off of the OEM site, but they don't have their locations. So
Yeah.
that was the how do we find these? And obviously the things that are easy to find, no problem, but
Yeah, and memory, you can kind of go off memory. You're like, I know where that part is. I get it every day. Or,
right,
yeah.
right. But
The
you get, I
massive
mean,
operations that have millions of dollars of parts, like, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So the you know the good thing would have been, I know CDK had obviously had their hands full in this you know during this whole thing, but the good thing would have been just to be able to get the last backup of a pad out to every dealer. I mean, that's what we did for our dealers that we did inventory on
Yeah.
recently, and but that probably would have saved a lot. But and there's a lot of people right now, oh, CDK this and CDK that, and it's I've had a number of dealers saying, oh, we're going to switch, we're switching in no time. And if you're switching because they got hacked, I don't know if that's the right thing, because probably they're the safest place to be because they did get hacked. So
Yeah. They're going
chances
to
of
be
it happening
stronger.
again are pretty slim. You go with one of the other company if that's the only reason you're changing, but it is what it is. So
Yeah, we can't sit here and point fingers because if you look at not just our industry, but industries across the board, this happens. And we just got hit hard and now we've got to learn from it. And it's just another layer that we have to really, which we already probably should have been looking at a little bit closer. But yeah, it's like we
yep.
keep saying, we just got to learn from it and stop that in the
Yeah, I
world.
mean it's a crazy world. I mean, security is definitely a big thing. I mean, it's ridiculous how many phishing emails are out there, and they're getting more creative every day. And it's just, but the bottom line is it happened, and hopefully the industry, all DMS companies, get some takeaways out of this. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
guarantee you CDK's got some big takeaways.
Yes, all providers, everyone are getting some big takeaways from this. So as we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to add to any viewers out there or anyone listening that might be helpful just as we close?
Yeah, the only thing, I mean, I guess, like, we had questions about, oh, we got to cancel our inventory coming up, things like that, because they're like, oh, we can't, it's a mess, and it's going to, if you do all those things, then your inventory should be fine. It's not going to be perfect, but we'll deal with that. It's much easier to get that done, and
I
as
would
far
think
as reconciling,
I was
what's
going to
that?
say it right. I was going to say I think it's even more crucial once you get everything added to still do those physicals just to make sure everything is right. So,
Yeah, and then, everyone's like, well, reconciling to accounting isn't going to be right. Well, it will be. I mean, the way we do physical inventory, we make sure we account for everything. So, and we assist in all that and make sure that we've got everything. And if for some reason they don't, they can always do a monthly they can do a reconciliation at any given time. They don't have to wait for a physical inventory. So you're
true.
doing two things at the physical. You're getting your pad correct, which is the on-hand quantities in the system, and that's one thing you're doing. And that's the biggest part of the physical inventory. Then you're reconciling it to accounting, and that's where, that can be done. If that doesn't come out right, that other, you can reconcile, the very next day if you want. And like I said, we have a program that does daily reconciliation. So the idea is you're constantly working on that, and you're just taking the pad value, but you've already, affirmed through the physical inventory that the pad value is correct. So you just keep using the pad value, as you reconcile. So
I think that's a good point and something to think about as, as we get caught up.
yep,
So,
yeah, that's it.
yeah. So
That's
thank you,
it.
Mark, so much for coming on. I think, this we need to have more people coming on the show to just talk about some things to think about as, the systems come back up so that we can continue on and power through. So
Yeah,
thank
absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, and yeah, it's good talk. We're all out there and available for anybody if they got any problems. So
Yeah, and we'll have the links. See if anyone wants to reach out to Mark. We'll have the links to find him. He's on LinkedIn. We'll have all the information if you have any questions for him. So thank you again, Mark.
all right, thank you. Talk to you later.
Thank you for joining us. PartsEdge, the power tool for your parts department. We hope you're leaving feeling motivated, challenged, and inspired.